Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another emergency broadcast of Bitcoin News Live. We've got a great panel ahead of us today to describe what is going on with the ongoing Coldcard exploit, the over 1,800 Bitcoin that have been stolen, and what to do next. So let's get right into it. On July 30th, someone emptied 1,100 Bitcoin wallets in 41 minutes. There wasn't a single person phished and nobody touched a single device. Those wallets were simply drained while in cold storage. Because 5 years ago, a build error meant the keys generated by cold cards were never really random in the first place. Every one of them was guessable from the day it was created. And the average coin taken had been sitting untouched for more than 3 years. These people believed that they did everything right. And the attack is still running now. This morning, at least 15 different thieves are hunting the same wallets. Today, we have 3 Bitcoin security experts to walk us through the situation and explain what to do next if you are still affected. Gentlemen, going to add you up on stage. Thank you so much for joining us. We have Jan, the head of security over at Trezor, Nick, the head of Casa, and Jameson, the CTO over there at Casa as well. 3 gentlemen who I think have a very interesting and skilled perspective on this subject we are dealing with. So, Jan, as the head of security over at Trezor, I'd like to start this question over to you. Please explain what happened with the cold card simply for people to understand. Was this software, hardware? Where did it all go wrong?
Sure. So there was a critical bug in firmware, in the most critical part of the firmware, which is seed generation. So this is the basic function of every wallet. The seed that it generates has to be truly random. It has to have enough entropy. You can imagine your wallet seed as a huge number. And this number, for it to be random, has to be picked from a huge range of numbers. The biggest number on this range is, or should be, bigger than the amount of atoms in the known universe. So it is very huge, and for someone trying to brute force to guess this number, even using the most advanced technology, they would have to spend their entire life, and it would still not be enough. In fact, it has never happened in Bitcoin history for anyone to brute force a wallet seed if the seed was generated correctly. But that's the problem here with this vulnerability. The seed was not generated correctly. It didn't use the true random number generator module it was supposed to use. True randomness comes from sources that are not predictable, like temperature inside the microprocessor, for example, or some time variations between processes. This is something no one can guess. And that was a function in Coldcard's code that was supposed to guarantee that this is used. But unfortunately, there was a bug on one line, which was supposed to check whether this is enabled or not. But unfortunately, it was just checking whether this function exists or not. And that's unfortunately a critical vulnerability that was introduced back in March 2021. And probably no one really noticed until now, and people started abusing it. So there was a fallback to a different source of entropy, but it's called pseudo entropy because it doesn't use these truly random inputs. Instead, it used things like ID of the microprocessor or system timer. And these are things that people can guess. They're not random enough. The entropy is lower. It's not 128 bytes as it should be. It was something between 32 and 40. So the attackers took advantage of that. What this means, if you initiated your Coldcard anytime between March 2021 and last week, you are affected. and no firmware update can fix it. It fixes seed generation, but if your seed was already generated, you are vulnerable and you should move your funds quickly. Just using a different wallet, even Trezor or anything, does not help you. You have to get this wallet, generate a new seed, and then send the funds to it. Theoretically, you should be safe if you use some extra features on the Coldcard during the seed generation, like the dice rolls. But you would have to do 100 dice rolls and do that properly, or you could have a super secure passphrase that is at least 8 random words or 16 random characters for you to be so safe. But still, I would recommend to move the funds. How this happened, Coldcard is an air-gapped device, which is a security layer. It means that it does not communicate directly with the host being a computer here. Being air-gapped means that you would use partially signed transactions and QR codes for the devices to communicate, but there is no direct channel. So this prevents a theoretical man-in-the-middle attack. However, there's a problem. This security layer means that you cannot use the host, the computer or a phone, as a source of entropy when you generate the seed. So Coldcard was only relying on the one source of entropy, and because of this bug in the code, it was not used. So this is different in Trezor. In Trezor, we're not air-gapped. We use cable or Bluetooth because we don't think the security benefits of the air-gap are enough. And obviously, there are drawbacks to this approach. So we always use entropy from host. And it's also validated by the entropy check in Trezor Suite that this entropy is used. Also, an extra measure, we don't have any sort of fallback to a testing module of pseudo-random generating in our firmware. So also this should not happen. So basically that's it. What's also interesting about this vulnerability is how it was introduced. Coldcard was initially forked from Trezor. That's why people sometimes ask whether this vulnerability is also present in Trezor, but it is not, because later Coldcard's code was also forked by their competitor, and they decided to change their licensing so that no more competitors can use their code. And in order to do this, they had to rewrite the code base. And during this rewrite, they introduced this bug, unfortunately. So that's why only Coldcard is vulnerable and no other hardware wallets at this point.
Thank you for that great explanation there. And Jameson, people have looked at this firmware problem from back in 2021. Some people have brought up this issue over the last couple of years. How inexcusable is it for this company, CoinKite, as well as the wider Bitcoin community, that this was not addressed sometime since 2021?
That's a difficult question to answer because you can play coulda, woulda, shoulda all day long. The short version is like there is no such thing as perfect software. We assume all software, all hardware has some level of vulnerabilities. Really, I think the problems that come up are, first of all, people having this assumption that open source software is automatically secure. And that is not the case. The reason that open source software is generally more secure, at least in the case where it is popular software, is because you end up with more eyes on the code. I think that one of the issues that happened here is that CoinKite is one of the smaller companies in the space. You could compare CoinKite to Trezor or Ledger along any number of vectors, such as like employee headcount or revenue or total number of devices shipped or whatever. And I think that in comparison, CoinKite is probably an order, if not several orders of magnitude smaller, and therefore, they just have fewer resources devoted to looking at this, fewer contributors looking at the code. I think CoinKite only had like 1 or 2 engineers, like full time, that were actually working on this. There have been, as this has come out, like a few other random security researchers have kind of piped up and said, hey, like I was looking at the code a few years ago and noticed some weird stuff. And some of them have even said I was looking directly at that line of the code and something felt wrong, but I couldn't, actually find the problem. And so, another part of the problem with this is that, as he said earlier, the actual bug was arguably not in the main part of the MicroPython code, but rather it was in the build system. And I think that, when people are looking at the code, they're just less likely to look at the build system. We've also heard from a number of security researchers that have used LLMs to audit the firmware of Coldcard, is that this is not something that all of the LLMs are catching either. It really has to do with like how much context you're giving to the LLM. You're basically having to tell it, look at the entirety of all of the submodules within the code base, simultaneously, and try to find any ways that they could be linked together poorly. Because if you're just looking at the code line by line, it's a lot less obvious that this is a problem.
And I think right now is a good juncture, 10 minutes in, to give a PSA. If you are watching this and don't know what's going on, if you have a Coldcard from 2021 or later, you need to move your funds off of that device as calmly but as quickly as possible. They are at risk. This attack is ongoing since July 30th. Over 1,800 Bitcoin have been stolen thus far. Nick, I would love to get your perspective on the attack, how it's played out, as you're somebody who's always thinking about Bitcoin security. What's transgressed over the last 4 days?
Well, so actually one thing to add to your PSA there is originally the cold cards that were getting hacked were the MK3s. And we think that a lot of the just like default MK3s are basically either drained by the attackers or people have moved the assets to safety by now. And so there may not be a lot left. And so then for MK4s, Coldcard Q and MK5, those are a little bit harder to crack than the MK3 for various reasons. And we think that there haven't been any cracked yet, but that it might still be possible. And so you should still move off of those if you're on a single sig with those. And then the last thing is, some people have been saying, hey, if you have a passphrase on your MK3, then you're okay. And Jan mentioned this earlier. And Jan said this, but the really critical point that I want to re-highlight is often the passphrase is called the 25th word to your seed phrase. And so people might just think of it as like, I just add one more word in here. And if you did one word, your wallet is definitely not safe. Because the next step that they're going to do after they went through all the MK3s with no passphrases, and I think they're already doing this, is they're starting to just go through very low entropy, aka like small passphrases, and try to grind through those, from a compute perspective to guess what they are. So if you're using a bad passphrase that isn't like the 8 words that Jan was saying earlier, which I think a lot of people don't necessarily take that approach, you still need to move off your cold card very quickly because your funds are up next to be attacked. So the blanket advice is just, if you are using a cold card, move your assets. Not worth risking it. The second thing, to answer your question about like what's taken place over the last few days, unfortunately, like it's kind of the nightmare fuel scenario of the whole situation of like cold storage in general, because you take this approach where you're like, well, I've got this air gapped hardware wallet. The only way somebody's going to get this is if I mistakenly put my seed phrase into the internet somewhere, or maybe if somebody like wrench attacks me or tricks me into giving them information so that they can steal my money. But this was just straight up like, no, you could have done kind of the default setup on an air-gapped hardware wallet, thought you were safe, and somebody was suddenly able to remotely crack it. And so this is, it's a very bad situation for the people who owned these wallets, obviously, but it's also just kind of sad because I think it puts a bad reflection on like self-custody hardware wallets in general if you're not really like, if you're just thinking it like kind of looking at it from the outside. Like I've seen people say, oh, this shows you how hard self-custody is, and maybe people should just trust a custodian. And I don't think that's necessarily should be the takeaway from this. I actually have a very different takeaway, which we can go into, but like the unfortunate part of this type of vulnerability and attack is that is the kind of naive conclusion to make from this. And so I'm afraid a lot of people might make that conclusion.
Yeah, we're going to dive into the future of self-custody and best practices moving forward, but there's still some basic things I want to touch on before we get there. And that's the idea of entropy and how to generate it. Lopp, I saw you post, you had some mycelium entropy generator that you played with a couple of years ago. Talk about how to properly generate entropy and how much is enough.
Yeah, I mean, the real problem that comes down to is how do you know if you have the appropriate level of entropy? And in general, the other hardware devices like Trezor, Ledger, or whatnot, as far as I know, and I think we can be pretty comfortable saying that they are properly generating sufficient level of entropy. Now this, you say, how do you know? Well, Trezor is open source. I'm sure even more people are going to be going and inspecting all of that code now. In fact, like there are entire teams of people that are devoting tens of thousands of dollars of hardware and compute time to doing that. So, I mean, that's kind of the bright side to all of this is that, whenever there is a security incident, the result is, Bitcoin and this whole ecosystem is anti-fragile. And so we are going to get stronger as a result. We're going to continue to improve our best practices. But, for the average, like normal person who, they may have heard this concept of don't trust, verify. I think we should probably have a bit more self-reflection on that mantra and be more honest with ourselves that very few people actually have the capability of verifying, especially at the software level and especially at the hardware level. Like even myself with a computer science background, I can read code generally. I don't have the capability to inspect hardware. Like that's something that, like maybe the Ledger Donjon team has the capability to do, but like almost nobody has the capability to do that. So point being, at some level, you're probably going to be trusting someone or something in this process, unless you're doing your own entropy generation. What does that mean? Well, like even the device that I showed, that was an interesting little toy that never really took off. The way to be sure is if you are physically doing something with your own hands. So that's where you start to see stuff about rolling dice or getting playing cards and picking them up. But then, of course, you're having to take that and you're having to do something to translate that into the number, which ultimately results in the huge, 2 to the 128 size number that Jan was mentioning earlier. And this is where, once again, the sort of don't trust, verify thing becomes a problem, because you're probably going to be using some software to do that translation. Are you going to then go read the software that's doing that translation? Probably not. There is something called Codex 32, which is, I think, a sort of pencil and paper way of doing it. But, that is going to take a lot of work. So you got to be pretty dedicated to do that. So, what I guess would be the best practice for a non-technical person? if you want to be super duper sure, I mean, there's a few options. Of course, there's the like multi-key, multi-vendor option of just you don't trust any one vendor, and you're generating entropy on multiple different pieces of hardware and software from different vendors, and then it's okay if one of them has weak entropy because it doesn't bust your whole wallet. If you're doing single sig, though, I think you would want to do something similar, where you're going to want to have multiple different pieces of software and hardware that are all running that same numerical translation, so that you're not trusting any one, but you're basically verifying, or you're attesting them against each other to make sure that they're both doing the same thing, and therefore the likelihood that they both have the same exact vulnerability or bug becomes much lower.
And I think the thing with this is, we're talking a lot about entropy right now. The chance of there being another entropy bug feels pretty low because of this, everybody's paying a lot of attention to entropy. The chances of there being a different kind of bug that might affect your funds in a different way, maybe it's not as catastrophic as the entropy bug, but some other kind of security vulnerability. This is security. It's a constant game of cat and mouse, whereas people make updates to the products that they put out there for people to use for this. They have a chance of introducing bugs, and there are attackers out there that are always searching for holes in the code or whatever product you're using so that they can take advantage of. And so you want to plan to protect yourself with multiple levels of defense so that you are prepared no matter what the vulnerability is.
And another way to add entropy on top is the passphrase, 25th word. We mentioned that briefly before. Jan, talk to us. How do you properly make a passphrase in this environment?
Yeah, so passphrase, in order to be really safe, has to be super long and random. In order for it to be random, you should use some software probably that generates a random passphrase, like a password manager. Then again, you're trusting some software, but a lot of these tools are open source and battle tested. So that's one way to generate the passphrase. But of course, if you do this, there is the drawback that you digitalize the passphrase. So there is some digital footprint. Maybe controversial, but I think that is fine as long as the seed itself doesn't have a footprint. But again, if there is a vulnerability in the seed generation, then this doesn't help you much. So all in all, I'm a little bit skeptical about passphrases. It's a very advanced feature we've been recommending with Trezor for a long time, but it's also a massive foot gun for people. So it's no longer a default feature in Trezor Suite, because what people do is that they set a passphrase, then they forget about it because they treat it as a password. And then they reach out to our customer support, hey, can I reset the passphrase? And unfortunately, no, you lost your Bitcoin. So passphrase is a way that can help you here, but really it's an advanced feature, not for everyone. So not really a silver spoon that can help you.
I wanted to point out real quick that I'm so glad that Jan just said that, because if you're going around listening to Twitter Spaces for the last few days, you're hearing all of the kind of influencer guys being like, use a passphrase, roll dice, do these different things to add entropy. And when you talk to the people who are building products used by lots of people to do these things, they're telling you people tend to mess up passphrases because they forget that they did it, and then they think it's a password, and then they lose all their money. And so it behooves people to listen to the people who have the battle scars of we have actually dealt with lots and lots of customers using Bitcoin wallets. And some of these things that are being suggested as so easy by the experts are for many people big time foot guns.
Yeah, it's very easy to do what I would call actually perfectly securing your Bitcoin. And this is one of the things about security in general, and I think this is what makes a lot of people uneasy in this space, is that actually, like, there is no such thing as a guaranteed security or perfect security, unless you're talking about something where, if you want to perfectly secure your Bitcoin, you basically generate a private key, send the Bitcoin to the corresponding address, and then you destroy the private key. Great. You now have perfectly secure Bitcoin. However, it's not very useful Bitcoin to you. So like the problem with the security game, and the reason why this is a big industry and the reason why this is never going to stop being a back and forth, is that what all of us here, like everyone who works at a security related organization, what we're trying to do is we're trying to find the right balance between security and convenience. We want people to be able to use their Bitcoin when they want to, while not allowing unauthorized people to use their Bitcoin. And that's the real challenge, especially then when you have been in the space long enough and you start seeing just all of the ways that people can naively and accidentally harm themselves. And it's an unfortunate problem that I think is the natural result of just freedom in general, is that people love exercising their freedom, but they don't always like having to put in the effort required to actually take the responsibility that comes along with it.
And one thing that was jarring really this week is that a lot of people had to move their funds under a state of duress, right? Like, this was Friday, you heard the news on Twitter, you needed to either send your single sig or put your multi-sig together and get those Bitcoin off a Coldcard. And a lot of people just didn't have the practice. They had sent the Bitcoin once to a Coldcard and then had just never touched it. And when you do that, the device itself could just malfunction sitting in a drawer somewhere, or you just get too scared and you mess up, you fat finger it. How do you say people should practice using their Bitcoin, playing with their Bitcoin, so that they're ready in a situation like this? Let's start with Nick and then go around the whole entire table.
Everyone should have fun playing with their Bitcoin.
Yeah, Trump was right at the Bitcoin conference. Like, you need to have fun playing with your Bitcoins, because this gives you the comfort to use it when the time comes. And so, like, we always say that you should always, any wallet that you're using, you should before you start using it, send a little bit in, send it back out, make sure that you feel comfortable with that process. But then a lot of people treat cold storage as something where you kind of lock it up, you dig the hole in the backyard, you bury it, you don't think about it for years, and that's that. Actually, in self-custody, you need to be doing very regular maintenance of your setup. And it's important to do that because of all the things that you said. Like, what happens if your key, your hardware device, malfunctions and breaks? We've seen over the years, hardware wallets just completely stop working. Like, the screen will stop working, or battery doesn't work, whatever it is. And so what we recommend is every 6 months you do a health check, which is just you're taking your key, you're either signing a cryptographic message with it if the software that you're using allows you to do that, or maybe you're just sending a little transaction in and out of the wallet just to make sure that you know how to do it. I think this is partly a problem with just how Bitcoin is used today. So like, there's a lot of focus around Bitcoin as digital gold. You invest in it, you don't spend it, you keep it for the long term as your savings. And that's where we are right now with Bitcoin. I hope that we will transition over time to a mode where people are using their Bitcoin more, they're using it as money. I think that's better for Bitcoin as a whole. I think it's also going to make people more comfortable with doing these things in the long run.
Jan, do you have any tips on how to make sure you're ready in a situation like this?
Yes, I agree with Nick, and I would say it's not only about transactions, but also about checking your backup. I think that's a critical feature in wallets, where you have the ability to verify that your backup is valid. So I'm not sure about all other competitors, but for example, in Suite, you just click check backup, and then you enter your backup words on your Trezor, and in the end, you learn it's correct or it's not. If it's not, you have a real problem, and you should move your funds to a different wallet. And also, I agree about the health check. It should be regular, so people can set up some notification to their calendar to do it once or twice a year. We wanted to add this feature to Suite so that it sends a notification to users that they should do the backup check. I don't think it's implemented yet, but it's somewhere in the backlog.
And then Lopp, any tips?
Yeah, I mean, just the main thing is to understand that security is not set it and forget it. As we've already said several times, this constant cat and mouse game. And so that means that if you want to ensure that you are staying on the forefront of the best practices of security, you need to be paying at least a little bit of attention to what's going on in the space.
And now, Jameson, I'd like to get a little bit deeper with you on just the current state of the attack, right? We've had this Kimi K3 open weight Chinese model come out. And since then, we've seen a lot of different cyber attacks, right? Like there are water facilities under attack in Minnesota from under cyber threat. And now we've got this big exploit with the Coldcard. What changed in the last couple of weeks? And is everything vulnerable now?
Kind of going back to my earlier point, I think we should operate under the assumption that everything is vulnerable. We just don't know the extent to which it is vulnerable. So the main thing that has been happening over the past year with the acceleration of advancement in large language models is just the fact that the capabilities of these models are progressing so quickly. And so, like we said, security is a cat and mouse game. And normally it's just like a little bit at a time. You know, one little new thing here, one little new thing here. Attacker finds a new thing, defender comes up with a new defense. And now it's just that the step functions of the capabilities in both the attackers and the defenders, you know, assuming we all have access to the same models, which isn't always the case. That's a whole other issue. But because the sort of delta in the capabilities of models is changing at almost like a monthly pace, the incentives are now for the attackers to go and, you know, basically they set up all of their auditing harnesses, frameworks, and whatever. And as soon as the new model drops, they're just going to be slamming it against all of the software, you know, all of the infrastructure that they think might have anything of value behind it. Therefore, if the defenders are not doing the same thing, there's going to be a lag. The attackers are going to be able to get and hit them until the defenders can react. And I think, you know, this kind of gets into why some of the Western companies are trying to like gate access to their models to try to give defenders a lead time on that. But of course, I think any sort of essentially KYC and gating and nannying of technology is ultimately going to fail. We just have to get all of the defenders on the same page that they just have to be faster to react and take advantage of the tooling. Otherwise, they will get taken advantage of.
Yes. And Nick, I want to hop this over to you because it seems like Bitcoin is a very valuable asset, of course, to go after. There's lots of open source projects to try to poke and prod at. But once they've swept that Bitcoin, all eyes are on it, right? And I think 90% of the Bitcoin that has been stolen thus far has made one move to another wallet, but then hasn't moved since, not to any mixes or anything like that. Can you give some color on what's going on there? What do you think is going to happen to that Bitcoin that has been moved out of people's wallets?
Yeah, I mean, this is hard to say because there are, so on the one hand, law enforcement, especially in the US, has gotten way more advanced over the last few years around tracking these kinds of stolen funds flows. And actually, they've gotten much more advanced thanks to all of the problems in the rest of crypto. So like this actually doesn't happen in Bitcoin so much, but every time there's like a new $100 million, you know, L2 bridge hack over on Ethereum or something by North Korea, like there's a pretty well established group of companies and or groups in law enforcement that are tracking those funds flows and trying to freeze them before when they go to exchanges or whatever. Unfortunately, there are still ways to get past all of that and effectively like launder the money through exchanges or platforms that will take the money and refuse to comply with freezing orders from like US FBI or some of these other you know, 3-letter group law enforcement groups like that. And so I can't say for sure what's going to happen from here. I know that some people have been doing really excellent work with tracking the funds flows and trying to identify not just that original wave of stolen assets, but I think up to like 4 waves now by multiple different types of attackers. Alex Thorne over at Galaxy Digital has been doing a ton of work around this. And so I hope that through that kind of work, law enforcement will have what they need to then submit, you know, asset seizure notices when these assets eventually do try to go to an exchange. But there are groups that are very good at moving this type of these types of funds and laundering them. And so it's also possible that some of it doesn't, or some of it gets away. Now, if they're able to freeze it in that best case scenario, or freeze some of it, you then have this quite difficult process of identifying who to give it back to, which is like, you know, I saw some people talking about doing like white hat hacking here.
It's happening. Yeah.
Yeah. And so where they're actually going in and preemptively stealing the Bitcoin from these wallets. And I think it's like, it's happening, but I haven't necessarily seen it happening to the extent that the black hats are getting stuff. But even in that scenario, it's like, how are you going to figure out who the original owner of this wallet was? Like, CoinKite doesn't really keep that many records, so you can't really cross-reference versus them. You could arguably say, like, maybe if they bring the actual Coldcard physically, which has a unique identifier on it, you could potentially use that as some way to identify them. But logistically, it's just going to be a huge challenge. And I think that's like the whole next, it's going to take years to figure out how to do that from here.
It's super messy. And the whole entire ethics behind the question, you steal these things, you steal these Bitcoin preemptively, then you got to lawyer up if you're a white hat hacker, right? You got to get a lawyer and give these things to a government, right? And is that what we want to be doing here? And then the people have to wait for a decade plus to get their Bitcoin back, as we saw with Mt. Gox. I mean, it's just such a messy situation. The number one thing you can do is get the word out, like we're trying to do right now. If you have a Coldcard that is MK3, 4, 5, or Q that has firmware from after 2021, be sure to move your Bitcoin as calmly but as quickly as possible. Huge thing. And now, Jan, kicking it over to you in this age of AI, what are you guys doing to make sure that your devices at Trezor are safe against these attacks?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so AI has changed the game. We can definitely feel it. Like I can talk about our Bug Bounty program, for example, where anyone can report vulnerabilities they find in our open source code under responsible disclosure guidelines, which means they report the vulnerability, we fix it, and after it's fixed, it's disclosed to the public. And in the past, we had a couple reports a year, but it's changed massively. We get several reports daily, and most of the reports are spam because they're super easy to generate with AI. But actually, in fact, when I look at the statistic, we fixed an unprecedented amount of security bugs in our products. And I don't want people to panic. It's normal to have vulnerabilities in products. Is nothing as critical as the Coldcard exploit. There are some things that can be hardened and improved. And we pay out bounties for these rewards to the researchers. And there's been so many of the reports that we have to create a position dedicated just to deal with these researchers. And we're grateful for all their reports. However, it takes a lot of time to triage all of them and fix it. And then, of course, we use AI internally for code reviews. We have several layers. We have AI to fix each pull request. That is kind of industry standard these days. But we also have a second layer to check whether any backdoor was introduced to our product, maybe a stolen developer account or a rogue developer could do that. So we also have AI to check that. And we're working on getting all sorts of licenses to have the most advanced models to perform security analysis on our code. So we're doing that. We're doing these with AI. We're using better and better tools, but as Jameson already hinted at, the process can be long before you get the approvals from Anthropic, OpenAI, etc.
It's a new game. It's a new era. Absolutely. And as we enter into this new era, we realize that single sig Bitcoin hardware is somewhat, we just saw a huge exploit, right? And so what's next? What steps do we take? And the words of this moment are multi-vendor, multi-sig. And you guys at Casa have been doing that for many years now. What are the benefits of multi-vendor, multi-sig? And when did you guys decide that that was the way to go forward?
Well, we started building this at Casa in 2018. So we've been doing it for 8 years now. And multi-vendor, multi-sig was like, maybe we didn't talk about it with those exact words, but that was what it was from the beginning. We've always had within your multi-sig, we've always had like at least 2 different types of hardware wallets that make up the keys. And then you've got your phone involved, and then you've got a key that's held by Casa involved. And so it becomes, many layers of different types of devices that have to fail at the same time in order to lose your assets. And so this is the whole, I feel like this is the thing with multisig that just people need to think about it. The simplest way to think about it is just adding layers of security where all of them have to fail at the same time in order for you to lose something. And when you say multi-vendor, multi-sig, it sounds kind of complicated and people are like, whoa, that's maybe over my head. And it really doesn't have to be. I mean, you can have this very simply by taking one Trezor and connecting it to Casa in a 2 of 3 multisig. And then that gives you a key on your phone, a key on the Trezor, and a key held by Casa. So if you were already using a Trezor as a single sig wallet, you can significantly improve your security by just connecting it to multisig without needing to manage all these extra wallets. Because I think when people think about this, they're often hearing about it from the same kind of X space influencer crowd, which is like, okay, go buy one of these hardware wallets, one of these hardware wallets, one of these hardware wallets, and then connect them all in Sparrow and or Electrum and do all these things. It just feels like a lot. And it doesn't have to be that way. And even to not shill only Casa's book, there's other companies that do a great job of helping you set this up. BitKey's good, Unchained is good. So there's other people that have been doing this for a long time along with us, and you can kind of see which product has the right set of trade-offs for you.
I think one other important point to bring up is that I think common pushback that you get is, why would I need to involve, yet another company in my setup when I can do this all myself? And to be clear, you can, and you always have been able to, before any of these multi-sig coordinator companies existed, you could go get an Electrum wallet and create multi-sig, or you even you could use command line Bitcoin Core to create multi-sig. It's always been possible, I think since 2012, 2013 at the protocol level to do multi-sig. But I think the problem with doing self-custody, really the problem with architecting a custody solution is that, as Jan has also said, there are foot guns. And so once again, you always have the freedom to do whatever you want within the confines of the protocol. But if you are not a like really, really deep technical expert and security nerd, the problem that you're going to run into is kind of in a way the same problem that CoinKite ran into, which is, as I said earlier, the strength of any given system, open source or otherwise, is going to be correlated to how many eyes are on it, how many people are using it, how many people are trying to attack it, how many people are defending it. And so when you're architecting a custody solution just for yourself and nobody else is looking at it, it's just a lot more likely that you make a mistake. We are all humans. We're all fallible. We all make mistakes as individuals. We all make mistakes as organizations. And I think that that's like one of the primary things that these companies, these multi-sig coordinator companies are trying to do, is they're trying to say, look, we understand everybody makes mistakes. How can we orchestrate a system that tolerates mistakes rather than allowing a single mistake to result in catastrophic failure?
And Lopp, another question for you. There's been a lot of people talking about, how do exchanges generate keys? How does Casa generate a key for a user? Does it look like a hardware wallet, or do you guys have a completely different process?
Yeah, I mean, in general, we don't know, right? So very few custody companies, I can't really think of any off the top of my head, disclose the like inner operational details of how they do their own key management. Now, for the past 8 years, I've been on the advisory committee for the cryptocurrency security standard. And that is essentially an organization that does nothing other than try to codify every single best practice when it comes to key management, from generation to storage to access to rotating keys and offboarding personnel. And to date, I only think maybe 2 or 3 companies have gone through that whole audit process and proved publicly that they follow all of those best practices. Now, I'm sure that many of these other companies do follow many, if not all, of those best practices. It's just we don't have that additional layer of like public attestation that this is the case. So, the short version is you should generally assume the worst. I mean, you should assume the worst even when it comes to Casa. And that's like the entire point of our system, is that even if the Casa key is weak or compromised or whatever, it does not result in loss of your funds.
Well, there you have it. And then I'd love to get Jan's view on multi-vendor, multi-sig. You make the Trezor, but do you think that it is best practices to put multiple wallets together in a multi-sig for security?
This entirely depends on your threat model. I think if you put all your life savings into Bitcoin, then yes, I think you should consider upgrading. I'm not saying Trezor is not safe enough. We make it safe enough for everyone, but there is a level of trust, as we talked about. So I think for any people like that who trust Bitcoin to the amount that they put substantial amount of money into it, then it is on the table for them to consider a more robust solution. Another thing they can do is perhaps diversify from Bitcoin a little bit. I think this is controversial, but I wouldn't recommend to anyone to be 100% in Bitcoin. I'm a Bitcoiner. I love Bitcoin. I think it's the best asset, but I wouldn't sleep well if I relied on Bitcoin. Even if I had multisig, Bitcoin itself, something can happen to the protocol. So perhaps think about diversifying between vendors, but also between assets.
Just go buy some NVIDIA.
Yeah, there you go. No, but I mean, this whole process leaves us with a lot of questions. And you guys think about self-custody all day, every day. Where does this leave us? What's next? how do we pitch to the average person that they should self-custody Bitcoin after an event like this? Let's take it, Nick.
I think that I've been thinking about this a lot because obviously we are trying to build a business around self-custody, right? And so I think that, as I said at the beginning of the call, the naive kind of maybe like easy take or conclusion to make is like, oh, this is hugely terrible for self-custody. It shows that the average person can't do self-custody. They should just keep it at a custodian or an exchange. And I think that's the wrong conclusion because if you think about this, what actually happened? The community trusted people that they thought were experts to write code that was secure. At an exchange, if you're keeping your assets with Coinbase or whoever else, you are trusting people that you think are experts to write code that is secure. If you're trusting, like if you're using Trezor, same thing. And so a lot of the, like if this was a scenario where, oh, we had this mass event where people were giving up their seed phrases or they were, getting tricked or wrench attacked or whatever, and on this hugely massive scale, that was something unique to self-custody. Maybe that's a little bit different. But in this scenario, it's just the makers of a product that we trusted made a mistake, and that resulted in a lot of people losing money. And that has happened many times over the years that Bitcoin has existed for other types of custody setups, especially in custodians. And so what I think is interesting, and maybe the like very small white pill in this whole scenario, is that if this type of vulnerability had happened at a custodian, a ton of Bitcoin would just be gone in the snap of your fingers because they're getting access to a wallet that, maybe the exchange uses a couple of different cold wallets, but many more customers' assets are centralized in one wallet in that scenario. And so if you have that type of vulnerability, then it can all be swept very easily. Whereas in this scenario, it was many different wallets, and the attackers had to go one by one, cracking each wallet and then sweeping the assets out of it. And so that actually gave time for people who were going to be stolen from it, gave them time to move their assets to safety. That's a huge benefit of self-custody because it's this defense through distribution in the Bitcoin network, and it just increases the resilience of Bitcoin as a protocol and as an asset overall when you have more people who are self-custodying, because the catastrophic events like this just can't be carried out as efficiently as they would if everything was sitting in a custodian. And so to me, that's the argument for why more and more people should be doing self-custody.
I think that's a great point. And Jameson, what do you think? What about the pitch of self-custody now to regular people?
So I think that trying to just orange pill the average person and say, you need to take on this responsibility is going about it the wrong way. And that's probably how you end up with this situation where we saw a lot of people who didn't even know how to use their cold cards because they just did what they were told. They bought a cold card, they put the money on it, and they forgot about it. So if I could wax philosophical a bit, I think the quote that really drives me when it comes to just this entire space and trying to tell people what to do is this quote that goes like this. If you want to build a ship, don't drum up people to collect wood and don't assign them tasks and work, but rather teach them to long for the endless immensity of the sea. And so I think the point there is that we shouldn't just be telling people what to do. We should be teaching them to long for the level of freedom and sovereignty that this protocol and network promises. But by promise, I mean offers the potential of, because as we've basically been saying this entire time, you have to be willing to take on the responsibility that comes with that if you want to actually be able to take advantage of it and sleep at night.
Yeah, that's a great point. That the most important thing is that you show people what is possible, right? But don't tell them this is exactly what you have to do, or you're not a real Bitcoiner, right? I think there was a lot of that going on with the cold card, and a lot of people got burned because of it, and it's so sad to see. And Jan, what do you think is the state of self-custody now in 2026 in the light of this attack?
I think the self-custody narrative is shaken, but it survives. Bitcoin survived worse things. And actually, I think when you think about it, there's no way out of it, because ultimately someone has to hold the keys. So even if you move your coins to an exchange, they still have to hold the keys. And maybe they have a better setup. Maybe they use multisig, but then you can use Casa and you have the same. But when you're on an exchange, you add an extra attack vector, because someone can gain access to the wallet and drain the funds, or someone can get access to your account on the exchange and withdraw the funds. So I don't really see a reason for people to turn to exchanges instead of self-custody in the long run.
Yeah, it's self-custody all the way down. Or in other words, third-party custody is just self-custody with extra steps.
There you go. Yeah, and as we round this out, what about resources? Where should people go to learn more if they are in need, if they're first time hearing about this exploit? What kind of things are there to give people a helping hand in this time? Nick, do you have anything?
Well, I guess to learn about the exploit, I've just been seeing a lot of info from a lot of people on X. So I guess some of the people that you can follow that have been, I think, really that sounded the alarm early are like Kevin from Liana. I think he was the first one to really sound the alarm on this. And then there's Rob Hamilton has been talking about this a lot. But I think as far as like what resources Casa can provide, we're going to be posting kind of an overview later today on our blog, just so people can understand what went down, have a place on the internet that isn't X in the timeline to go. And then, we're for people who are actively like, hey, I'm on a cold card and I need help moving off of it. We have places on our site you can book calls with our team. Like we have so many people that we're talking to that I put myself on the calendar. So like I'm doing calls with people. So it's a very busy time, but we're happy to help people get to better security.
Yeah, and Lopp, I mean, you've got a website with all the resources there.
Yeah, basically every security resource that I've ever come across that I thought was halfway decent is on lopp.net, lopp.net.
There you go. And Jan, if people are in need and want to learn more, do you have any resources or ideas of where they should go?
Okay. When it comes to Trezor, we have our knowledge base on our website where they can learn about entropy in general and our security checks. When it comes to this topic, I've seen a good podcast just yesterday. It was What Bitcoin Did with Rob Hamilton. I like that one. I think it's worth watching.
Yes, shout out to the Sleepless Warriors, Wicked Smart Bitcoin, Portland Huddle, Rob Hamilton, Kevin from Liana, and many, many more people who have been on X Spaces for the last 4 days straight, haven't really slept, and have taken a lot of questions, handheld people through the process of migration, and made sure that people didn't completely freak out, right? This is a problem with one hardware wallet, not the Bitcoin protocol. And if you are able to make moves, there's still a chance that you can make sure everything is safe and has the highest level of security. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for this hour of your time. It's very important that we do everything we can at this time to make sure that people know what is actually going on and what they can do about it. In terms of where people should go, Nick, and then Jan.
Yeah, so you can find Casa at casa.io. You can follow us on Twitter at Casa Hodl, HODL. And then you can follow me at Neuman, Neuman. And then Jameson, I think you're at Lopp, Lopp on Twitter.
Beautiful. And Jan?
You can find all about Trezor at trezor.io. We are on socials, X, Instagram, LinkedIn, I think TikTok as well. it's impossible to follow me. I'm not really on socials.
Yes, wonderful.
A true security professional.
Yeah, that's what you want out of your head of security at a hardware wallet. Absolutely. No footprint. Cool. Well, guys, thank you very much for your time. As I said, this was very trying for the whole entire community, and as many knowledgeable people that can get out there, spread the word, and ensure people what the proper next steps are, I think the better. So thank you everyone for tuning in to this emergency broadcast of Bitcoin News Live. Stay on board and make sure you see all the latest coming out, because we are keeping you up to date. Gentlemen, thank you.
Thank you.